Hello. If the past 3 weeks have reminded me of anything, it's that I do not have all the answers, but I'm crafting a plan. As you see this, I will be in literal transition from Chicago to Atlanta. It is one of my biggest life changes and is sandwiched between two tumultuous episodes. I could have believed that a string of police shootings could mobilize America, but I never fathomed that mobilization would occur in the midst of what I hope is a once-in-a-century pandemic. In tough times, we reach out, seeking meaning, and in the weeks of marathon conversations with my family, with my Black, white, Latinx friends, with everyone, we end accepting that we don't have many answers, but we don't stop asking the questions. Ancora imparo requires it. I typically take the Dan Ryan to work, but on the Monday after the first weekend of looting in Chicago, I took city streets 85 blocks to the school. What I saw was block after block of boarded up, busted in, and boarded and burned buildings. Just a day before, I had penned a letter to the Cristo Rey Atlanta community in an effort to help our students parse meaning from the marching, unrest, and looting happening there. George Floyd's murder punctuated the senseless deaths of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and did more than galvanize a movement for reformation. It mobilized people of all persuasions around the globe. And I wanted our students to know that there was something they could do, indeed should do. We should be angry that systematic institutional racism perpetuates a cycle of violence that goes unheeded by many except in Black and brown communities. And though no one who truly seeks a just society will sit on the sidelines, how do I advocate even peaceful protests when stepping out into crowds could mean violent or viral death? We make choices. I choose to march in solidarity and prayer. And I wanted my students to know that they too have choices to make, and that a decision to raise their voices in crowds was far better than inciting riot or looting, and that yes, even doing what you believe to be the right thing comes at a cost. We spent our first Remix summer in a South Bend bubble that allowed us to focus on our work and new friends. It insulated us from many of the storms we might otherwise encounter. But the peace of that seemingly idyllic existence was punctuated on July 6th with the shooting of Philando Castile during a routine traffic stop. I remember the abrupt stop of the routine of that morning and feeling that the walls of DeBartolo Hall were closing in. Emotion welled up within me, and when I could no longer contain that odd and unsettling mix of anger, sorrow, and isolation, I left class. After what seemed just a couple of minutes, but was surely longer, I looked up to see that one of the teachers had followed me out and was lingering closely, but just far enough away. She was not trying to solve a problem. She chose simply to be present, to be with me through those tough moments. I simply needed to vent and rant and question and cry out against God and government and, well, just everything. I grieved the loss of someone I did not even know existed just hours earlier. Castile's shooting rocked me. So I believe I can relate when our students see videos of these and similar killings. Their demise is resurrected incident after incident because it's all digitized and stored and just waiting in the cloud. These thoughts and feelings sat with me in the passenger seat as I drove to work that day. It took me an hour to make it to work. I tarried a while. It was a slow drive because I could not believe the devastation, or believe that it occurred just blocks from my house. It was as though I had somehow slept through a tornado, even though I knew there was a storm brewing. The experience was another piece of the puzzle that had been coming together in my mind for weeks. I had been contemplating my entry into the new school. Of the 3 possible school start scenarios, the one that has me starting my freshman year as principal in an empty or half-filled school is the most unsettling. How do I enter community, share my authentic self with faculty, staff, and students, a fourth of whom will be meeting for the first time, when we are not able to engage in the most human of activities, seeing each other's smiles, hearing each other's voices, shaking hands, hugging. Now the challenge is to communicate warmth from afar, intone welcome, hope, and excitement through an electronic transmission of my voice. One of my past principals often described the activities of the opening days of school as getting the elephant to stand. Can you imagine the elephant whisperer who accomplishes this via Zoom from the relative comfort of home? This is what we may be well called to accomplish. Every school in the world is rethinking, refiguring, and refining plans. COVID-19 response teams and coronavirus task forces abound. Now add to that the social unrest that has awakened in our students, a drive to be heard, a desire to correct injustice in their communities, and yes, in their schools, in our schools, in their second homes. Part of accounting for and acknowledging our students' realities is being willing to listen to them share their frustration and curiosity. The world is out there, but for the last 3 months, it has breached every barrier we might have imagined existed. COVID-19 began with a seeming whimper in what we might have thought a far corner of the world. Today it roars its way through even the most rural of American communities. Likewise, I cannot imagine an American space that has not been impacted by the protests. Try as we may, these twin experiences permeate our lives. The protests we saw or participated in were not Zoom protests. We walked en masse. We knelt in the streets to pray. We lined the busy boulevards. The best of the protests were bodies in motion and people at prayer. In what world could you imagine success with virtual wokeness alone? Our students are coming of age in an era of extreme change, and as far out of our comfort level as it might be, we are the adults who must model transition in the midst of uncertainty. It would behoove us to prepare for paradigms that have yet to be devised. And just how can we do that? I submit that we begin with prayerful discernment, and my own discernment has galvanized my belief that I am an apt instrument in God's hands. That is to say, we build the kingdom. God works through us. We can be reluctant Moseses, impatient Sarahs, or enthusiastic Marys, but we must be in the midst of the fray in our schools. Disengagement at this juncture only primes the pump for more miscommunication down the line. Sweeping our students' inquiries under a rug is not avoidance, but magnification. Ignoring only perpetuates the environment that amplifies our students' fears and frustrations. We are, after all, disciples with hope to bring, and we must negotiate the sometimes blurry lines between discipleship and citizenship. In a brief essay that limns the boundaries of discipleship and citizenship, James Spillman exhorts us to challenge the leaders of our government to make compassionate, just, and moral decisions that authentically reflect gospel values. But of course, we must do this in our personal practice first. Thanks in part to my REMIC experiences, I've heard Father Greg Boyle speak a few times. He reminds us to seek the margins and that once there, to simply be with those we find there. I cannot rise each day and seek the center when my students call me to them from wherever they are. So I've chosen to linger, to be both in the moment and yet planning for tomorrow. Every school leader knows this isn't impossible because we do it every year. We are simultaneously here and there. We do it and perhaps it exhausts us, but it is necessary. It is the cost of ensuring our tomorrow is better than our today, the product of the hope we bring. Like my drive to work after the looting, I will tarry a bit with my students. I will simply be present with them as they rant and cry out against God and government and grieve. I do not have many answers, so my plan is to linger. I will be the encouraging presence in the midst of the reluctance of any faculty members who do not believe that they are capable of creating safe places necessary for their students to have meaningful conversation, healing, awkward conversation about race, racism, power, privilege, or protest. I will linger to challenge institutions, yes, even my beloved ACE, to embrace Ankara Amparo, and to continue to improve by deepening the fellows and leaders' awareness of the subject positions of their students, the kids whose lives we touch every day. Silly as it may seem, my mantra is just to tarry a while and to see what is actually going on. A lot of questions can be answered if we just look and give ourselves permission to be uncomfortable and vulnerable and unsure how the ground will shift next as we lead in our schools. It is no panacea, but it is a plan. Thank you.